In today's lesson with me, we are looking at ecology under biology. And under ecology, we say that when you hear the term ecology, we're simply talking about the study of organisms and how they interact with the environment as well as themselves. So when we look at the environment where we stay, we see different organisms that live in the environment. These organisms interact amongst themselves and also with the environment in which they are found. Now, today we're only going to look at an introduction to ecology, which means we're only going to focus on the language of ecology, which is the thing that is going to help us understand fully what ecology is and the like. Now, when we look at ecology, we need to look at different terms such as the species. Now, when you hear the term species, we're simply talking about a group of living things that have similar features and can interbreed to produce fertile offspring. Now, what am I saying? When we look at our environment, we have different species or organisms that live in the environment. We have the human species, we have the animal species, which are of different types. We have the frogs, the hyenas, the lions, and the like. Now, when you look at these different organisms, we're saying that a species is a group of living things that have similar features and can interbreed to produce fertile offspring. Taking an example of the human species. The human species is made up of living things that have similar features, and also they interbreed among themselves in order for them to produce different offspring that are also of the same characteristics. Now, we know that every time we hear the term species, we're talking about living organisms that are having similar features. Now, when these different organisms are grouped according to their characteristics, you find that they form what is known as a population. Different organisms or different species, when grouped together, they form what is known as a population. Now, what is this population? When you hear the term population, you should know that a population is simply a group of organisms of the same species that are living in a certain environment. When you look at the humans are made up of organisms that are of the same species and living in a certain environment. Now, we're saying that to begin with, a species, when we're talking about species, we're simply referring to a group of living things that have similar features and can also interbreed among themselves. Now, when these different species of living organisms that are found in the environment, when you group them together according to their features or characteristics, you find that they form what is known as a population. When we look at our environment, we have different populations that exist in our environment. We have the human population, which is a group of people, or it is a group of organisms that are having the same species, and the human species is one example of a population. We also have a population of lions, we have a population of hyenas, a population of frogs, a population of different animals such as the cats, the dogs, and all the animals that are found in the environment. Now, all these organisms that we're claiming to form a population also are found in a certain environment where they're able to benefit from a certain habitat in which they are found. You find that when those different organisms or a group of organisms live together in the same habitat, they form what is known as a community. Now, when you hear the term community in ecology, community simply refers to a group of organisms living together in the same habitat or community. That is an environment where they stay. Now, we know that when you look at the human species, the human species is made up of different populations of people, and also those different populations of people stay with different populations that live in the environment. You find that the human species in a home can keep a dog, a cat, and other animals. Now, when they stay in that environment, they form what is known as a community. A community is simply a group of organisms that are living in a certain area. And in an area, we tend to have different communities that live in a certain area, or we tend to have a group of populations that are found in the same area and they interact with each other. You find that people will interact with the dogs, the cats, and other animals. I know you're thinking a human cannot interact with the lion, but that is why we go to the zoo and all that other stuff that humans tend to do. So we have said that different species that are living in a certain environment form what is known as a population. And a population, it is a group of organisms of the same species. Now, this group of organisms of the same species also form what is known as a community. And I've said that a community is a group of organisms living together in the same habitat. And this community is mainly having a population of different organisms that are found in an area and interact with each other. Now, we know that I've also made mention of a habitat. Now, when you hear the term habitat, we're simply talking about an environment where an organism gets both its shelter and also the food. So an habitat in ecology is simply a place where an organism gets food and shelter. Examples of habitats, we have aquatic habitats, which is found in the water. We also have terrestrial habitats, which are found on land, such as the humans and these lives. Their mainly the main habitat is land. Now, we know that in the land where different organisms stay, we have different factors that are found there. We have the living part of the environment and also the non-living part of the environment. Now, when you hear the term non-living environment and the living environment, we're talking about biotic factors and abiotic factors. Now, when you hear the term biotic factors, we're simply talking about the living part of the environment. So biotic factors, these are living components of the environment. For example, we have the plants, we have the animals, we have the bacteria, we also have fungi and all that. So the living part of the environment is known as the biotic factors, and we have fungi, bacteria, plants, animals, and so on and so forth. Then we also have another factor which we're calling as the abiotic factors. Now, when you talk about abiotic factors, we're simply talking about factors that are non-living. Now, this is mainly the non-living components of the environment. We have an example of the soil, the water, the rocks, and also the air. And we also have other things such as the temperature, the minerals, the pH value, humidity, and so on and so forth. These are known as the abiotic factors, which are non-living. Then we have the biotic factors, which are living. Now, we know that in the environment where we live, we have what is known as the biosphere. Now, I'm not going to explain the biosphere in this video, but I'll explain it later. For today, we hold that for thought. Now, we have also heard a term known as a niche. What is a niche? Now, when we hear the term niche, we're simply talking about a role that something plays or that an organism plays in a certain environment or so. So, a niche in ecology is a specific biological role that an organism plays in an ecosystem. For example, the plants and algae are producers, and the animals are consumers, and bacteria are decomposers. Now, when we look at an ecosystem, This is an example of a pyramid showing different organisms that are performing different niches or a niche. When we look at this diagram here, it's showing different organisms that perform different niche. We have the autotrophs, which are mainly the producers. We have the heterotrophs, which are mainly the consumers, and the deuterotrophs, which are mainly the decomposers. When we look at heterotrophs, these mainly produce foods using sunlight energy, and they mainly produce their own food. These feed on what has been produced by the producers. Now, we are saying that a niche is a biological role that an organism plays in an ecosystem. And we have different roles that each organism will play according to its feeding habit. We have the producers. The producers, these are organisms that are able to produce their own food using sunlight energy and in the process of photosynthesis. We have an example of the plants and also the algae. We have the primary consumers, which are mainly the heterotrophs. Now, these primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers, these are animals that mainly feed on the energy that has been produced by the producers. So the secondary or the primary consumers, these are animals that feed on the producers. The secondary consumers are animals that feed on the primary consumers. The tertiary consumers are animals that feed on the secondary consumers. And we have decomposers that feed on any of these animals if they go bad or when they undergo the process of decaying. Now, having talked and said that, we also need to talk about a food chain in an ecosystem. Now, before we talk about a food chain or a food web, we should know that an ecosystem, the pen is misbehaving. So we're saying an ecosystem is made up of different communities of living things that interact with each other and the environment. When we look at the previous chart which I had here, we are seeing that this ecosystem is made up of different communities that interact amongst themselves and also with the environment where they stay. So an ecosystem is just simply a system that is made up of different communities that are able to interact with themselves and also with the environment in which they stay or occupy. Now let's talk about what a food web is. Now when you hear the term food web, we're simply talking about a sequence of organisms showing the feeding relationship. For example, we have this sequence of organisms which is showing what each organism is feeding on and the feeding habits that is taking place. We have the producers, which are the organisms that are able to produce their own food using sunlight energy. Then we have the primary consumers, which feed on the producers, and we also have the secondary consumers, which feed on the primary consumers, and we have the secondary consumers and tertiary consumers. So we're saying a food chain is simply a sequence of organisms showing the feeding relationship among organisms. And lastly, we have what is known as a food web. Now when you hear a food web is a group of interconnected food chains that have been put together. So in a food web, we have an interconnection of different food chains that have been connected together. When we look at this example, this is an example of the food chain. We have different food chains that have been connected together to form what is known as food web. We have this plant, the grasshopper feeding on this plant. The grasshopper is also being fed on by the frog, and the frog is being eaten by a snake. The snake is being eaten by the eagle. That is one food chain connected to another food chain. Hence, we are saying a food web is a group of interconnected food chains, and we form what is known as a food web. So that's it. We've talked about ecology. We've talked about what ecology is. We've said ecology is a study of living organisms and how they interact with themselves and others. And also talked about different terminologies that you come across when dealing with ecology.